My eating disorder is not the reason I don't buy leather, wool, or silk, and it's not the reason I don't eat dairy, eggs, or meat. If you search veganism and eating disorder recovery, you will probably notice a common theme, this belief that the two are basically mutually exclusive. Something along the lines of, it's very hard to recover from an eating disorder while vegan because veganism is inherently restrictive, and restriction and eating disorder recovery don't mix. Some take it further than that. This Tabitha Farrar, she calls herself an eating disorder coach, which is just another way of saying not a licensed therapist. She says anyone suffering from an eating disorder, either currently or in the past, should not be vegan, actually cannot be vegan. And so if you say, well, I had an eating disorder and I've recovered on a vegan diet, yeah, you're delusional. Did I mention not a therapist? While expert opinion on veganism and eating disorder recovery isn't typically as extreme as Tabitha's view, it's very clear that many experts, many eating disorder therapists don't like the idea of the two going together, or someone trying to remain vegan while recovering, to the point where most eating disorder recovery treatment facilities do not allow vegans to remain vegan. Not all of them. Practicing vegans can have eating disorders, but veganism itself is not one. That comes directly from Alsana. That's a treatment center that does not make vegans eat animal products at their facility. Balance is another vegan-friendly facility. And there are experts in this field whose mission is to make this sort of care the standard, to make sure that no vegans have to worry about compromising their morals in order to get care. Like therapist Jenn Friedman, she was kind enough to send me a copy of her new book, Veganism and Eating Disorder Recovery. In it, she argues that not only is not allowing vegans access to vegan food in recovery not evidence-based, but it's also harmful to vegans and to their recovery. So a little bit of backstory, and then I will get to the meat of the book. So Jenn is vegan, and she did suffer from an eating disorder. She did go to a treatment facility where she was not allowed to remain vegan. She is fully recovered and fully vegan. As you can imagine, her experience has fueled her desire to help other vegans and to help therapists learn how to help vegan patients. And her experience also presents a potential bias, right, towards remaining vegan during recovery. She knows exactly what it's like to be vegan and, again, be forced to consume animal products in the name of recovery, and that being in recovery from an eating disorder and vegan is possible. She actually addresses this early on in the book in this disclaimer section, which of course I love. She also has this wonderful line about compassionate neutrality. When she's describing her disorder, she describes it as a wound that needed tending to while it was healing, and now it's scar tissue marking a point in time she regards with compassionate neutrality. Sounds like a wonderful therapist, honestly. I wish I could say the same about my own feelings towards my past disorder. I guess it's just my personality, but I can't help but shake my head and laugh about some of the things I did and thought. It's more of a befuddlement, a humorous befuddlement than a compassionate neutrality. Yeah, did I mention I also had an eating disorder? I suffered with bulimia years and years ago now. I never got diagnosed for it. I never went to a therapist for it, but my behaviors fit all of the DSM-5 criteria for bulimia. This started prior to veganism, but got exponentially worse while raw vegan. Shocking. Who would have thought that believing cooked vegetables are bad for you would worsen an already bad relationship with food? Who could have thought? And my own experience presents a potential bias for me. I recovered fully vegan. In fact, the last time I would have intentionally eaten anything not vegan would have been during a binge. So of course I'm annoyed. I bristle at anything like this because she's talking about me, right? She's saying I'm delusional, that I can't possibly be recovered because I choose not to eat animal flesh and animal byproducts, foods that I don't think are food. I've also heard from a few of you, 2 of you wonderful viewers, who have had negative experiences with therapists surrounding veganism and eating disorders, being told to give up veganism in the name of recovery, and doing so, doing what the therapist said, and not recovering. But like for Jenn, I don't think any of this influences my beliefs. I'm pretty good at being able to separate myself from other people, basically. And I've said many times in the past, I'm sure there are instances where veganism and eating disorder recovery does not go together. I have no doubt there are people who would benefit from not being vegan, at least temporarily, in order to recover, even though that was not my experience. I remember being acutely aware during my first meal in treatment that I was experiencing eating disordered discomfort at biting into a sandwich and vegan discomfort at biting into the piece of chicken inside the sandwich. Jenn does an incredible job of distinguishing between the vegan mind and the eating disordered mind, right? Making choices for vegan reasons versus making choices for eating disordered reasons, which is at the crux of patient-centered care, regardless of veganism, right? Regardless of food choices, trying to figure out why a patient is making the choices they're making. An eating disorder often involves disgust with oneself. The disgust is negative, something to be worked through and ultimately released. Veganism involves disgust with animal exploitation. It is not a vegan's ultimate goal to stop being disgusted. Rather, a vegan's feeling of disgust can be considered contextually appropriate. A vegan would use this disgust consciously to propel them toward positive change. Vegan disgust is rational. Eating disordered disgust is irrational. Now, in some cases, there is no distinction. There is no difference between the vegan mind and the eating disordered mind because there is no vegan mind, right? Every food choice is a disordered one. Every feeling of disgust and revulsion is self-directed. The person is not really vegan, right? They're using veganism to fuel the disorder or to hide behind their disorder. When eating disordered individuals adopt the label of veganism as a restrictive guise, they are not choosing the vegan food so much as they are refraining from choosing something else. Vegans, in selecting food, are invoking their agency via their ethical beliefs. And the same can be said for other diets, right? Particularly more restrictive ones like a paleo or a keto diet. Someone can say, oh yeah, I'm keto because carbs are evil, insulin resistance, digestive concerns, blah, blah, blah. But really, they see it as a way to heavily restrict and lose a lot of weight. For me, like for many others, my bulimia was about weight. I wasn't really vegan. That wasn't why I didn't eat animal products. I stopped eating them because I thought that it was healthier to do so. And then I thought that it was healthier not to eat cooked foods either. And really, even healthier was mostly a guise for weight. So I would eat, say, a handful of pistachios during the day. I know the horror. And yeah, it was bad because food combining and it's a lot of fat, blah, blah, blah. But really, a handful of pistachios is a lot higher in calories than a handful of strawberries. And I was worried about gaining weight. Everything came back to weight. This photo, I thought I was fat here. I weigh a good 20, 25 pounds less than I do now. I got lower than this to the point I was actually underweight via my BMI, and I still wanted to lose more weight. Once I realized how serious my condition was, once I was really honest with myself about how many times I said, well, this is it, this is the last time, so it's okay. And crucially, once I stopped caring about being ultra thin, I got better. Even on raw vegan, I got better. As much as it pains me to say, I would love to say I stopped being raw and I got better. No, I got better on raw foods. And I stayed better. Giving up raw and eating cooked foods again, I stayed better. And then when I finally truly became vegan, actually adopted veganism for ethical and not dietary reasons, I stayed better. I didn't relapse. Because clearly for me, my bulimia had nothing to do with veganism, really had nothing to do with diet and everything to do with obsession, this obsession with being ultra thin. As I said earlier, treatment facilities often do not cater to vegans because they believe it's counterproductive. They believe it's really just catering to the eating disorder. And yet, many do cater to vegetarians. Why? Vegans cut out certain food groups, yes, and vegetarians do too. Not as many, but they don't eat meat. They're cutting out certain foods. They are restricting in the exact same way. They would be just as upset about biting into the chicken sandwich as Jenn was. They are the same in the ways that supposedly make veganism so dangerous for recovery. It's totally arbitrary, and I think it speaks to the nature of veganism and eating disorder recovery wisdom. It's based on feelings, not evidence. What about evidence? Do we have any on veganism and eating disorder recovery? And we do, as Jenn shows very well, very extensively in chapter 5 of the book. And the evidence does not support this notion that veganism is harmful to recovery. On the other hand, we see over and over and over again exactly what Jenn shows, that there is a difference between the vegan mind and the eating disordered mind. The weight loss diet group tended to be the most extreme. By contrast, the vegetarian, vegan, and especially the paleo groups showed characteristics of relative psychological strength, including more helpful and health-motivated eating behaviors. Semi-vegetarians, but not full vegetarians or vegans, are most likely to engage in disordered eating behaviors. Vegans and vegan vegetarians typically endorse significantly lower levels of restraint and external eating, and greater levels of food acceptance in comparison to semi-vegetarians. Only health-related motives are associated with orthorexic eating behavior, whereas ethical reasons are not. So this is not evidence. This is feelings. She feels that veganism and recovery cannot coexist. It's also lazy, right? It's so much easier to just put all of us, any vegan who has an eating disorder, into a box that just says, oh, your eating disorder is your veganism. They are linked. You are only vegan because you want to restrict. The therapist, the treatment facility, they never have to make any effort to figure out why a patient is vegan, what their motivations are for the food choices they're making, because they already know. And they don't have to work to make a separate plan, a vegan-friendly plan for them either. Just feed them what everyone else is eating, regardless of the harm it causes. Jenn argues that not only is treating veganism and eating disorder recovery mutually exclusive, can't be done, not only is this not evidence-based, it's also harmful. It's harmful to a patient's recovery, and it's harmful to the patient's well-being, which, duh. I mean, if you're vegan, whether you have had an eating disorder or not, you already know this. I'm sure when I read that quote about Jenn biting into the sandwich earlier, we can easily imagine ourselves going through that and what that would feel like. Trying to pretend you're not eating what you're eating, trying to keep your recovery at the forefront, trying not to feel sad, trying not to feel guilty, on top of just trying to get better, on top of the eating disorder you're already dealing with. Jenn shares this story from a fellow vegan in the book who also went to a treatment facility and was not allowed to remain vegan. And I don't think I can read it without crying, so I'm just going to put it here and you can pause the video and read it if you like. Long story short, this is borderline abuse and is in no way conducive to recovery. And then there are the quieter cases of harm, so to speak, the vegans who refuse to go to care because they know this is the kind of stuff that's going to happen. They know at the very least they're going to be forced to eat animals, so they just don't get help. Relapse is always a possibility, even for me. If that were to happen, if it got so bad I needed to actually go to a facility and I couldn't be vegan there, I had to eat meat, or maybe I could be vegetarian, just eggs and cheese, no, I just wouldn't go. I'm not saying that's the right choice, but knowing myself, no, I would not get care. Eating disorder experts are putting vegans in a terrible place. They are effectively denying care, in some cases life-saving care, based on feelings. And the vegans who do get care, the vegans like Jenn and Emily who are strong enough to suck it up and do what they have to do to get better, well, now they have all this added stress and all this added bullshit on top of having an eating disorder. Any therapist or treatment center insisting on this type of care needs to fully understand the inherent harm it presents to vegans. Clearly, they don't care much about animals, at least food animals. Fine. The least you can do is care about your patients. And just to be clear, these are my thoughts, not Jenn's. Jenn is very, very compassionate and very kind towards everyone in the book, therapists included, which is one of, I think, the best things about the book. She really is, I think, viewing things from all sides and trying to understand both sides and seeing therapists as people who do care and want to do best by their patients. But just for me personally, I think a lot of this comes from people who maybe just don't want to deal with it. They really just don't want to deal with veganism. And it is a lot easier to go, oh no, that's just your eating disorder. Eat the chicken. At the end of the day, this is a book about agency, which is central to optimal care. You cannot be a good therapist and believe this, right? Call your patients liars, believe they don't know their own minds. You cannot be a good therapist and insist that a vegan give up their veganism despite their veganism existing prior to their eating disorder. You cannot be a good therapist and believe that cases like mine and Jenn's, being fully recovered and vegan, are the exception to the rule. To doubt a patient's ability to know themselves is to doubt their ability to recover. Therapy is a partnership, right? You're working with your patient, not telling them what to do. As a therapist, you're supposed to listen. And when a patient says, no, my veganism is mine, it's an ethical choice, it has nothing to do with the food choices I'm making within veganism, therapists need to listen. I'm not saying it's always that easy, of course, right? Agency, yes, but eating disorder, bulimia, anorexia, whatever, they are mental illnesses. And sometimes we really don't know our own mind that well. Sometimes we really aren't sure how much of it is the vegan mind and how much of it is the eating disordered mind. I believe it is my job and the job of my team to help each individual, regardless of their feeding preference, get honest about what's behind those preferences and see if we can untangle the ethical vegan beliefs from the eating disorder. One way to do that is with questionnaires like this one, this separating my food beliefs from my eating disorder. What other lifestyle changes have you made to accommodate your veganism? So if someone is eating a vegan diet, but they're still maybe purchasing non-vegan makeup, they don't even look to see if something is cruelty-free, they're wearing wool, whatever, that could be an indicator that the veganism is not really veganism, that the veganism and the eating disorder aren't separate. This book right here, it's also a book about nuance, right? Every patient is different. As Jenn says, she's not saying that every recovery is going to look like hers. She's not saying that every vegan will be able to stay vegan. It's up to the therapist to help the patient figure out which approach works best. It's not up to the therapist to just put the patient in some sort of vegan box and just assume that veganism is always a hindrance to progress. So why vegan, right? Why is the focus always on veganism? Because it's not the only there's too many like restrictive eating disorder, recovery. I don't know. There's a lot of words I'm having trouble with in this video, but obviously it's not the only restrictive diet. I mentioned keto earlier, which is one of the most restrictive diets. It's way worse than veganism, right? We're not talking about food groups. We're actually talking about macronutrients. There is a condition associated with keto, right? The keto headache, like you actually end up in pain by doing this diet. And yet you don't see keto and eating disorder together as much. Again, going back to that Tabitha Farrar person, she's got several posts on veganism, none on keto. I think because keto is truly just a diet. It's not an ethical stance like veganism, right? So you hear someone's eating keto and it's like, oh, wow, that sounds hard. Or like, oh, that sucks. No bread. Oh, yikes. But you hear someone going vegan. Oh, well, why are you vegan? Oh, because it's what I'm doing is bad. Is that what you're saying? Like we come from the same culture doing the same things and you have made a choice. You've taken an active stance not to participate in something because it's bad. And I participate in that thing multiple times a day. Ooh, I don't like that. It's upsetting to people to the point that they, as an eating disorder coach, behave like this toward people who have successfully recovered. Cognitive dissonance is a hell of a drug. To end on a positive note, first, it seems that things are improving when it comes to therapy and veganism. I found this survey of UK practitioners, and they found overall positive attitudes towards veganism from the practitioners. And I think books like this are just helping to speed up that process. Overall, 10 out of 10 book. I believe early on, she quotes an informal survey that found that something like 98 out of 100 therapists, practitioners had actually worked with vegan patients. So clearly this is something that every therapist should read, right? This should be required reading for any sort of professional in the eating disorder space. I also think this can be useful for patients, people who have eating disorders or think they do, particularly the chapters on this difference between the vegan mind, as I call it, and the eating disordered mind, how to distinguish these two things. I think it would be good to have if you are seeing a therapist or going to start seeing a therapist to have something like this, particularly that questionnaire, which I think is online. You could print it out and work on it with your therapist to spur things along and get the conversation going and just start off on a like, these are not the same things. Yes, I'm vegan, but it's not the same thing. Or maybe it is. Let's figure it out. Sometimes doctors respond positively to new information. Sometimes they do not. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a like if you did. Subscribe if you want to see more stuff from me. Thank you so much to my patrons at patreon.com/unnaturalvegan. I do post 2 exclusive videos there a month for $5 plus patrons. I do a controversial one unrelated to veganism, so I'll have that one up for June in the next couple weeks. And again, thank you so much to Jenn for sending me the book. She even wrote a little thing in there for me, which I've only had happen like a couple times with a couple things. And I don't know, it's always such a special feeling getting a book from someone and it's got something written just to you in it. Oh, the cutest thing ever. I have this book called The Rainbow Goblins. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. The art is just gorgeous. My aunt got this for me when I was very little, and she wrote a little, thing in it, like you do when you give a kid a book. And I wrote back to her in the book. It says like, "Thank you so much, Aunt Stephanie. I love you," something like that. And that's just there. So every time I open the book to read it to my kids, it's the little things, I need to text that to her. She'd get a kick out of that. But anyway, thank you so much to Jen. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much to my patrons. New video soon. So one nitpicky thing, this idea she presents that a vegan diet is not restrictive, which I talked about briefly earlier. And I understand what she's saying, and I largely agree with that. And I like that distinction. We are not just refraining from other foods. We're not just trying to escape other foods and using veganism as a way to escape. We were actually choosing veganism. I like that way to frame it, but a vegan diet, it is restrictive. You're cutting out certain foods. Any diet, literally any diet is restrictive. Unless you just eat whatever you want all the time, you are restricting to some degree. If you're trying to be healthy and you're cutting calories, you are restricting your food intake, right? If you are vegan, even if you do it purely for ethical reasons, even if you don't care about health or anything at all, you are restricting your diet. Like you are, it is still restriction. So I don't think you can really get away from that. I understand trying to, particularly when you're talking about eating disorders, because eating disorder and restriction, you don't put them together. It is restricting. Just by definition, it is. The key is finding out what motivates that restriction.